I've done enough for the alarmist case. If they want it presented better, they can debate me in public. Now I'm going to talk about the science of the skeptic case, because I don't think this gets communicated very well, and it's way too nuanced to survive a television soundbite. I'm going to ask a series of 5 questions about global warming. First, I'm going to ask if there has been any warming over the last century and a half. Then I'm going to ask if the warming is due to man-made CO2. And then I'm going to ask how much warming will there be in the future from CO2. And I'm going to ask what catastrophic effects we can expect to see or perhaps are already seeing from man-made global warming. And finally, we'll talk a little bit about CO2 abatement programs like the Cap and Trade Bill currently in Congress and the Copenhagen Treaty. Okay, first question, is the world warming? Yes. I'm not going to argue about it, there's no point. The early 19th century was the end of the Little Ice Age, perhaps the coldest period in the last 1,000 years and maybe longer. A warming trend in recovery from this frigid period is entirely to be expected. Again, I think a lot of skeptics waste their time arguing about stuff that there's no point in arguing about. This graph shows the temperature history going back into the 19th century. The source is from the East Anglia Climate Research Unit in the Hadley Center, a totally normal source of data, though recently under fire as a result of numerous improprieties in the CRU scientific process. But since this presentation predated the now famous email release, I will largely ignore this topic in the rest of the lecture. The data source switches over on the right to the more modern satellite technology in the light blue. The orange line is the moving average. From it we see a trend of 0.6 to 0.8 C over this period, or about 1 degree Fahrenheit for the last century and a half. But while I acknowledge the likelihood of some past warming, there are a couple of twists to our tale that are not well publicized. Before I get into these, I encourage you to try an interesting exercise. Go onto Google and search for global warming accelerating, and you will get over 1 million articles that say global warming is accelerating. As recently as December of 2009, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said, quote, "Climate change is happening much, much faster than we realized, and we human beings are the primary cause," quote unquote. So let's look at the tail of the tape. Here is a zoom in the last 10 to 15 years of the previous temperature chart. I have not put a trend line on it because currently we're in the midst of a trend line war where various people are taking this chart and cherry picking end dates to show the trend they desire. But I think visually you can tell that 1, you can't see any real acceleration here, and 2, it sure looks awfully flat for the last 8 or 9 or even 12 years. And that is not something, no matter what climate scientists say, that their models predicted. One scientist famously said in the CRU emails, quote, "Where the heck is the global warming? The fact is that we can't account for the lack of warming at the moment, and it's a travesty that we can't," unquote. The oceans are a particularly good place to look for global warming. Land does not hold on to heat very well, so most of the heat the Earth's surface retains is buried in the oceans. They are the heat reservoirs for the Earth's surface, and so measuring ocean temperature is critical. Over the last 10 years, we have launched new satellites to perform these measurements better. We have also launched some really cool Argo floating buoys that drift around the world measuring ocean conditions and from time to time sending a probe as deep as 800 meters to sample ocean temperatures at various depths. This chart shows what these new technologies tell us about ocean temperatures over 8 years or so that they've been in operation. Again, we can play endpoint games, but it's difficult to find a warming trend in this data.